Well, guys, it's been a long time. I'm sorry. I've been away. I have no excuse. I didn't even plan on what I was going to say. Except that I'm back. And today, I've got a few things going on. When do I not have a few things going on, right? Just always have something cooking. A few things, actually. So, it's only 10:24 a.m. right now. And I have chopped up 4 red onions. I'm starting a French onion soup this morning. Remember a while ago I made the video about the vegetable broth that I canned? I'm going to use about 5 cups of that. I got up early this morning and I baked some bread. By some bread, what I'm talking about is I made 2 batches of wheat yeast rolls. And I pulled some green onions from the garden and I chopped them up and I mixed them in the dough. And I'm sorry I didn't make a video on how I made this, but if you want, I will post a recipe for this in the description below. And as always, baking some bread in our bread oven, or our little bread machine. There's the leftover scraps from the onions. And then I'm just going to slice some tomatoes and probably have them sliced tomatoes with some cheese and the yeast rolls for lunch. I was going to bake some biscuits and gravy for breakfast, but nah, I think I've got enough food. I've got some bacon. Hold on. Let's go back over here into the fridge. Got some bacon that I need to fry and replenish my lard, because I used some of it for the yeast rolls this morning. And if you can see, this bread here is bread that I made last week. Now you're wondering why I'm baking a new loaf of bread if I've already got bread here. It's because this bread is like a rock. I had too much wheat in it. So I wanted to show you, this is my flour supply. And I'm going to sit the camera down, hopefully where you can see me. Okay, so this is my flour bucket. This is stuff I use for baking, and I keep them together. I was using straight wheat flour. So what I had to do is I had to mix half part regular bread flour and half part wheat flour in order to make kind of the wheat bread. And I figured this out. I guess I probably could have Googled it on the internet. However, I didn't know. I was using straight wheat flour. Problem with straight wheat flour is it doesn't have quite the gluten that gives you the rise and fluffiness for bread. So, like I literally had to redo it. But I have this loaf of bread that's like a boulder in there. So the reason I'm making the French onion soup, it is a solution to the bread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the French onion soup, and I'm going to slice up the bread into kind of like a small little 3-inch slices and soak it in the soup when I serve it. That way the bread doesn't go to waste. So what I've got in here is about 4 onions diced up, about a tablespoon of olive oil, extra virgin, and a little bit, like a teaspoon of salt. And I'm just going to basically simmer this up. I'm just going to fry this up until this bread is translucent. And then I'll come back and I'll show you what I'm going to do next with all this broth over here. It's going to be lovely. Alright, I'll be right back, guys. Don't worry, guys, that's just the bread machine. Quick tip, when you guys are cooking anything, keep your recipe out in front of you. Keep it handy. I always follow exactly the same recipe, no matter how much I think that I've memorized it. It's always good to be able to look back and make sure I'm following the ingredients correctly. So for this French onion soup, the recipe called for 2 tablespoons of sherry, which I don't have. So an alternative to that is balsamic. So we're going to use balsamic, and it recommends beef broth. Now, if you remember, the broth that we have is all vegetable broth. So in order to make it taste a little beefier, I'm going to add maybe a tablespoon of Worcestershire to just give it that meaty flavor. And then this is my balsamic vinegar that I'm going to use instead of sherry. So just some ideas. You guys can get creative with your food and your cooking as long as you don't go way out into left field. And if you think you want to try something, give it a shot, and just don't be so hard on yourself if it doesn't turn out well. I've done it several times where it didn't turn out the way I wanted it, but you persevere, you know, adapt and overcome. Our onions are starting to get a little translucent, so I'm going to pay closer attention to this and keep stirring it, and I'll come back with you. If you're wondering what these little specks are all over in the onions, I added some red pepper flakes. Just to kind of, I like it with a little kick. Maybe some of you don't, but sometimes I need a good kick in the butt, right? Am I talking to you? Okay. Sometimes you guys are going to learn things while cooking that you never thought of before. Like when you eat things in a restaurant, you don't think about the method to how the food gets to be the way it is by the time you get it. So I'm slowly simmering these onions, right? And the red onions, they're big red onions that I just chopped up from the grocery store. And onions are pretty dense vegetables. They're very crunchy. They're very hard. And if you're eating it in a soup, you don't want that really strong acid taste and that hard crunch. So as I'm slowly letting it cook in this pot, it's softening up to a very gentle, and it's mellowing out the taste. So, oh, the bread machine no longer has anything to say. So, learning something new while we're cooking onions, and I'll be right back and show you how it ends up looking by the time it's done softening up. It smells so good in here. Okay, quick quiz, kids. What's wrong with pork? Pork, let me just explain. The same time that I canned the vegetable broth, and I'm sorry to keep interjecting things, but I kind of learn as I go. But the same time we canned and made that vegetable broth, I also had pork broth that I think I made a couple weeks before that. I found them when I went to grab more vegetable broth, and I thought, well, why not try some pork broth in the French onion soup? As soon as I opened that can, it smelled like somebody farted in here so bad. It was like a fart in a can. It was rank. It was bad. Anytime you have a funny smell like that, you got to throw it out. And I will work on perfecting that skill, but for today, we're just going to use vegetable broth. So, sorry about that. I'll be right back with the onions. Okay, guys, we're back over with the onions. Do you see how soft they are now? They're starting to brown just a little bit, but I don't want to brown these onions. I just want to get them cooked to where they're soft and tender. So I'm giving it one last mix to keep them from crispifying. And we're going to throw some of this vegetable broth in. So this is a 2-cup measuring cup. And it's going to get real quiet. And I was cooking this on a little less than medium. Medium is at 5, but whatever it is on your stove, I was cooking up the onions about 1 notch down from medium. And I figured out that one of these jars is about 2 cups. So now we're at 4. Got another jar here. We're going to measure out 1 more cup. That's good right there. We're going to be simmering this for about 30 minutes. So if you put a little extra fluid in there, that'll be fine. And remember, I was going to make this a little beefy flavor. So here's my Worcestershire. I don't know how much that was. I didn't measure it. Sometimes when you're cooking, you don't necessarily measure. And then we're going to put a little bit of balsamic in here. Now, I didn't refer to my book, so I'm going to go check my book. And it says add 2 tablespoons of sherry or balsamic So I'm just going to go 1, 2. I know it's not perfect. If you want it to be perfect, I am a perfectionist, but sometimes when it comes to cooking, I just kind of eyeball it. And I like the taste a little different than what's always written in the books. So I'm going to agitate this a little bit. Another part of the recipe is to add spices as needed. Now, I already added about a teaspoon of salt when I started simmering up these onions. So it asks for spices like thyme, or I think it was thyme, salt, and something else. But I do want this to be a little, how do I say it? Have a little kick to it. So I just grabbed the paprika, and yes, I'm going to add a little paprika to this. And a little more. Okay, that's it. I don't want to get carried away. I don't want it to be so kicky that nobody wants to eat it. I'm going to close up my vegetable broth that I have left. And since I've used and opened this jar, I've got to put it in the fridge, and I'll probably use it for another soup a little later on. So this is still on medium. Once that heat kicks up again, this is going to start to simmer. It'll actually probably start to boil, so I'll bring it down to a simmer once it starts to bubble up. And we're going to get, ooh, don't forget the most important thing about cooking this, guys. Chicken timer. We're going to set chicken timer for 30 minutes once this starts to bubble, and just let those flavors cook all together. I might come over and just move it around a bit to make sure that the onions don't stick to the bottom. And we'll come back in 30 minutes and check on our soup. What do you think? Yeah, let's do that. Be right back, guys. We are almost done. Look at that simmer. So I'm gonna take this over to the table, and I'm gonna show you guys how lunch looks in the end. Now, for French onion soup, we usually add in like a provolone or mozzarella cheese and then bake it on top. But number one, we don't have provolone or mozzarella. Number two, we have Parmesan, and I'm kind of trying to avoid too much of the fat dairy. So this is trying to be a healthy lunch. So we'll just sprinkle a little Parmesan cheese on top once we serve it up in the bowl. So let's go take a look. I'll be right back. Alright guys, I'm wrapping this up because it's time to eat. This is our soup. I've already ladled some of the soup into our bowls. And then I put a little bit of Parmesan cheese in it and I'm just letting it melt right now. We've got our yeast rolls that we baked, and it's still hot and steamy in their bag, but I'm going to slice those in half. Remember the heavy bread that was like rock? I sliced those up, and so if my husband wants to put his in his soup, or if he wants to make little sandwiches, I have some mayonnaise and tomatoes here. My dad used to have little sandwiches out of a small piece of bread, a little mayonnaise on top, and a slice of tomato. That was it. Tomato sandwiches. So lunch is served. Soup and sandwiches, a little French onion soup done our own way, but hey, it looks good, doesn't it? Thanks for joining me today, guys, and thanks for watching. I will try to come back and make more videos. I'm sorry I haven't. I've just been caught up with work, and now things are slowing down, so now we're going to have more stuff to cook. And it may seem like that's a lot of food to cook for just one day, but I try to cook a lot of food and just eat it throughout the week, because once I come home from work, I'm too tired to just make a whole meal. So that stuff, and that bread roll, there's a whole lot more in the fridge. There's a whole nother bag right there in the fridge. So more broth, we can make soup, and then there's some other leftovers. So always prepared for later on in the week makes the rest of the week a lot easier. Love you guys. Thanks for joining me, and you make it yourself, you make it your home, right?